Hello, I'm Andrew Pearce. This is The Daily Show from the Daily Mail newsroom. Coming up, we'll be getting the latest on the Oscars. A big upset of foreign national films. Parasite won the Best Film movie. Also, we'll be talking about the Tory party. Are they really considering a mansion tax in next month's budget? If they are, Boris Johnson will have his first big revolt. What's the cure if you've got a broken heart? Apparently, it's eating more. How much would you spend on washing up liquid? Try £22. Yes, that's how much some people are spending. But first, the coronavirus. The Department of Health has declared it a serious and imminent threat to health in Britain, as 9 Britons are confirmed to have contracted the virus. So the language has changed again from the Department of Health. They have said now the coronavirus is, quotes, a serious and imminent threat to health. 9 Britons have confirmed to have the disease. Britons evacuated from China have been quarantined, around 100 of them, in a hotel in Milton Keynes after evacuation flights from China. Since the outbreak began in the city of Wuhan in China, 900 people have apparently died. 37,000 have become infected. Joining me now is Dr. Al Edwards from the School of Pharmacy at the University of Reading. Dr. Edwards, I know they say it's a serious and imminent threat, but how serious and imminent is it?
I mean, it's very hard to tell at this stage, which is what I'm sure everyone keeps saying. This is such a rapidly developing situation, and of course there's so much that we don't know. I guess to give it perspective is that at this time of year it's fairly common, or maybe a few months ago it's very common for the NHS to say that, there's a winter vomiting virus crisis, or there's a winter flu virus crisis, and these things can be very difficult for our health systems and health services and our population to deal with. It's a different type of threat, but it's every bit as serious, and of course we're hoping that it won't be a problem, but we just have to be aware that it could escalate quite quickly.
We've had, as you say, vomiting viruses, that sort of thing before, but I don't think I can recall a time before when so many British people have been placed in quarantine. I think we've got over 100 in quarantine at a hotel in Milton Keynes after another airlift from Wuhan.
So that's a really interesting point, and I think that's what we probably need everybody in the general public to be as keenly aware of as possible, is that really the only tool we have to combat this kind of infection is to prevent spread. And the only way to prevent spread is to quarantine and isolate people. Now, this isn't a new concept that, public health systems have quarantined and isolated people with infections ever since we knew that infections could spread diseases, whether it was cholera or whatever used to be a problem in the past. The difference is that our current population is, in a way, blessed that we don't have to deal with that on a day-to-day level. So I don't think that people should be too alarmed by the quarantine process, but the most important thing is that people understand that that's the best tool we have to defend ourselves.
The problem still, of course, is, Doctor, that we don't know very easily if somebody's got the virus, because they may not show any symptoms.
So that's the really interesting bit, and that's why it's too soon to know what's going on. There's a lot of conflicting reports about whether people can spread the infection before they have symptoms. It's just a really difficult thing, and this is where this point about monitoring and testing becomes really important. It's the sort of the hidden important bit. So we have 2 tools to defend ourselves against this kind of outbreak. One is to isolate people and prevent them from spreading it. But the second tool is this tool of detection. And without being able to detect and spot the virus, you can't see where it is, and so you can't stop it being spread.
And finally, these latest 4 patients, Dr. Edwards, they've been transferred to specialist NHS centres at Guy's, St Thomas's and the Royal Free Hospitals in London. I know people listening to this will think, oh my God, I might live around the corner from there. Am I all right? Am I going to be safe? Should I start wearing a mask?
So I think that's again, is a good question. I think once somebody is identified as being a contact or as having an infection, I think you need to rest assured that we have incredibly skilled and highly trained health service professionals who will absolutely be preventing spread from individuals. So I think the risk doesn't come from people who've been identified and are being cared for, and it doesn't really matter where they get taken to be cared for, as long as they get the best standards of care, they will be safe to the general public. The risk comes when you have unknown people who haven't yet been identified as being infected, who will be going around their day-to-day life, which is perfectly reasonable. But I don't think we need to worry about the people who've been identified.
Very reassuring. That's Dr. Al Edwards. He's from the School of Pharmacy at the University of Reading. Thanks for joining me. Now, remember to tell your Alexa speaker to play Daily Mail News, and you'll get the latest newsroom live from Mail Plus and at 5. Now, bad news for people with big houses. A so-called mansion tax is one of the measures Chancellor Sajid Javid is apparently considering for next month's budget. It's part of a plan to fund investment in public services, but the Conservatives had savaged a similar proposal when the Labour leader was Ed Miliband, and this was aimed at owners of homes worth more than £2 million. With me now is Stuart Adam, Senior Research Economist at the Institute of Fiscal Studies. Mr. Adam, I can't believe the Tories would be so foolish to go down this route, not least because how can it be a mansion tax when, if it's in certain parts of London, it would be a tax on a small flat or a cottage?
So first of all, we don't really know whether they're going to do this yet. It's so far just reported that they're considering it. If it's on properties worth more than £2 million, that's still pretty high value properties. It's a pretty small fraction of the total, whichever way you cut it. Even though, as you say, in London, it's a much bigger share and it's much more, if you like, normal sized properties than it would be in much of the rest of the country.
But it would be odd, wouldn't it, having torn asunder Ed Miliband when he was Labour leader over that proposal, the mansion tax, to then dress it up and perhaps try and repackage it in a different way and bring it back as their own policy 4 years later?
It would certainly be a big change in direction. It wouldn't be the first time governments have done that.
What would be your advice to them on this? I mean, would it be a very efficient tax?
As far as efficiency goes, it's actually pretty good in that, property is one of those things that can't move. So a lot of the ways that you might try and tax wealthy people, you might worry about the people or their income or their wealth going offshore, for example, which property can't go anywhere. So it does have advantages like that. And one obvious question is, we already have a tax on property value levied annually. It's called council tax.
Right.
And it's not clear, would this be an additional tax on top of that? Or would it actually, I'd have thought, be rather better to fix council tax? And council tax is looking pretty strange at the moment. For one thing, it's still based on what properties were worth in 1991.
Yeah.
That's almost 30 years ago now. The second thing to remember is that it is true that council tax is a smaller percentage of property value for high-value properties. So you could argue in that sense that high-value properties are relatively under-taxed by council tax, and that, if you like, creates a case for taxing high-value properties more, and for that matter, taxing low-value properties less. But I would rather do that, if you're going to, by fixing council tax,
yes,
than by layering a separate additional tax on top of it.
Because there's also, of course, as you know, Mr. Adam, there will be some people who've lived in the same house for 40 years. They may have paid £2,000 for it in the 1960s or something, and that house could now be worth £2.5–3 million, and it could be a pensioner couple on a very limited income.
Yes, absolutely. And one difficulty with property taxes in general is that often people may own a valuable asset, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they've got a cash flow from which to pay the tax. Now, there are ways you could go about dealing with that. One thing you could do is, for example, allow people to defer paying the tax until the property is sold or until they die, and then you take it out of their estate or something like that. At the moment, we don't allow that for council tax, but we do it in some other areas, and some other countries do that.
All right, that's Stuart Adam, who's Senior Research Economist at the Institute of Fiscal Studies. Well, we asked, for your view, is a mansion tax on owners of large homes a fair way to pay for the government's public spending plans? Guess what? 65.5% of you on our Twitter poll said no, and I'd be one of them. Now, if you want to get in touch, email me at dailyshow@mailplus.co.uk, or you follow us at mailplus. You hear the latest Daily Show. Well, it was a night of surprises at the Oscar, with Joker, which led the pack with 11 nominations, only bagging 2 awards, although one of those was Best Actor for Joaquin Phoenix.
I've been a scoundrel in my life. I've been selfish. I've been cruel at times, hard to work with, and ungrateful. But so many of you in this room have given me a second chance. And I think that's when we're at our best, when we support each other, not when we cancel each other out for past mistakes.
Oh, God, his speech got much worse. We'll talk about that in a minute. Netflix also nominated widely, only received 2 awards, including one for Marriage Story. Brad Pitt also won his first ever acting Oscar with Best Supporting Actor for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
All the wonderful people I've met along the way to stand here now. Once upon a time in Hollywood. Ain't that the truth?
But the night's biggest surprise has to be Parasite, which won Best Film, the first non-English film to do so in the century-long history of the Academy Awards.
I feel like a very opportune moment in history is happening right now. I express my deepest gratitude and respect for all the members of the Academy for making this decision. Thank you.
Well, it seemed to be a popular win. Joining me in the studio now is Jennifer Ruby, of course, the Daily Mail's senior showbiz correspondent. Jennifer, I've got a terrible confession to make. I'd never heard of Parasite.
Well, not many people in the UK have, because it only came out last week.
Right.
It was nominated at the BAFTAs, of course,
OK.
The week before, when, of course, no one in the UK would have seen it, because it wasn't out. It is out now, and it's well worth watching. It's incredible. It is an amazing film.
It's satire, comedy, thriller. Bit of everything.
Exactly. It's being billed as a black comedy.
Yeah.
It is very black, but there's
Are we still allowed to say that? Well, we just have, so let's carry on.
Yeah, there you go. It is hard-hitting. It's kind of genre-defying, I'd say, but it's an emotional film.
What went wrong for 1917?
I think a lot of people felt it was a little gimmicky. Maybe perhaps the Academy felt they wanted to go in a different direction this year. Maybe honouring a foreign film was a political choice as well, perhaps. Yeah. It's a film about social class.
Particularly after the row over diversity and the lack of black nominations.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the director, Bong Joon-ho, sorry, I just had to get that right, he delivered most of his acceptance speech in Korean, which must have been quite a surprise for the room of Hollywood celebrities.
I thought it was amazing.
And it felt like a really interesting moment, I think, for the Oscars.
I wish Joaquin Phoenix had delivered his acceptance speech in Korean, because it was absolutely cringe-makingly awful. What on earth was he going on about his veganism for, and the fact that we take calves away from cows and then we take their milk, or we put it in our cups of coffee? Who cares what he thinks?
I mean, Joaquin Phoenix, a great actor and well-deserved, I think, for his win for the Joker. But yeah, he did seem to kind of get on his soapbox a little bit about a number of issues.
What did the audience make of that speech? I suppose they clapped enthusiastically because they just do. They did.
It went down well in the room. I think looking at social media, it didn't go down quite as well.
I didn't want him to win because Heath Ledger won for a very similar film a few years ago. The year he died, we all knew he'd get it possibly. I wanted Jonathan Pryce for The Two Popes.
He was great in that. He was great.
And he'll never get nominated again, will he?
I mean, possibly not. Maybe the roles will come flooding in now.
What did we think finally? Brad Pitt, I mean, he's everybody's heartthrob pin-up. He's finally been acknowledged for the fact he really is a very good actor.
He is. He's been nominated a few times for Moneyball, for 12 Monkeys back in the 90s, Curious Case of Benjamin Button. Ooh. He missed out on all of those. So I think everyone was pretty pleased to see him finally win. He was very good in the Quentin Tarantino film Once Upon a Time in America and deservedly won. I think everyone thought.
Yeah, Angelina, eat your heart out.
Exactly. Was she watching? Who knows?
I bet. That's Jennifer Ruby, the Daily Mail's senior showbiz correspondent. Now, if you enjoy The Daily Show, please subscribe to us and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Google or Spotify. And if you want to get in touch, email me at dailyshow@mailplus.co.uk or you follow us at mailplus. Now, coming up, Jane Clark tells us how we can beat a broken heart. I've had a few of those. And would you spend £22 on washing up liquid? Guess what? A whopping 97.6% of you on our Twitter poll said no. Who are the 2.4% who said yes? Get them on the programme. Let's get them on. Perhaps we'll change your mind. But first, it's time to find out what's on TV tonight with Claudia Connell.
Thanks, Andrew. I don't know if you remember, but 3 years ago, the former footballer Rio Ferdinand fronted a really moving documentary. It was called Being Mum and Dad, and it was about the challenges he faced as a father after losing his wife to cancer. He actually won a BAFTA for that. So tonight on BBC One, there's a follow-up called Rio and Kate Becoming a Step Family.
Where I didn't have children before, and I've just all of a sudden inherited 3 children that have their own way of doing things and got this own, however their mum used to do it. I'm obviously acting as a mum, but sometimes I forget silly little things, like I forgot to cut their toenails.
Rio recently remarried, and this documentary is about the challenges in becoming a new family and moving forward when you have 3 young children who are still grieving for their mother. I think 1 in 3 families in the UK have a step-parent now, so it is very pertinent. It's another really thoughtful documentary from Rio, and they come across as a nice sort of caring family. Also tonight we've got something called The End, which is a new British-made series starting on Sky Atlantic.
I don't know what you want. I want to be dead because I can't stand to be alive knowing that I wasted all of it.
Just be your grandmother.
Any drama that opens with a scene of an older woman trying to end her own life sounds like heavy going, but surprisingly, that it's really not the case. I mean, in the same way that Ricky Gervais's Afterlife found humour in tragedy, this does too. Edie's failed attempt at suicide leads to her being reunited with her estranged daughter and taken to live in a retirement complex in Australia, arguably a fate worse than death. Harriet Walker and Frances O'Connor are the 2 female leads, and they give great performances in a series that I would say is definitely worth 40 minutes of your time. And then the time difference between the UK and LA meant that last night's Oscars happened far too late for most of us to watch. So tonight on Sky One, there's a highlight programme, Oscars 2020, where they've whittled down the tediously long ceremony to show only the best bits. Even if you don't care who won, it's always fun to look at the hits and the misses when it comes to the red carpet fashion. And also the best bit, of course, is looking at the losers trying to look pleased when the Oscar goes to one of their rivals.
Thanks, Claudia. Now it's time for our regular city update with Hugo Duncan, Deputy Business Editor at the Daily Mail. Now, Hugo, according to the ONS, that's the Office of National Statistics.
That's correct, yes.
People aged 34 to 44 are now 3 times more likely to be renting than they were 20 years ago.
That's right. The report's out today on the sort of changing nature of home ownership in the UK, obviously something very close to many people's hearts in this country, says that people in their mid-30s to mid-40s, there are now a third are still renting from private landlords, and that is up from fewer than 1 in 10 in 1997. So a pretty dramatic change over the last 25 years or so.
And it's astonishing when you consider interest rates are at an historic low.
They are.
But I guess it's raising the deposit. But it's truly, the problem is the price of houses.
House prices have absolutely raced away in recent years. Obviously, there was something of a correction, quite a large correction during the financial crisis, but within 2 or 3 years, house prices were back above where they were in many parts of the country, and continue to rise even today, despite various sort of economic problems we've had.
Before the election, I would say to these wretched Tory MPs, if you don't find a way to get people aged 35 to 40 back on the housing market, you're never going to win a general election again. Of course, we hadn't reckoned on Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, indeed.
But they had nothing in the budget for that. Nothing in the general election campaign for that generation of people.
Indeed, they didn't. And there is obviously a budget coming up next month. I mean, interestingly, you talk of the election, 3/4 of people aged over 65 own their own homes, whereas, as we just said, there are a third of people aged 30s and 40s who don't, and you can see that in the age groups that actually voted for the Tories in the election and who voted for Labour.
Well, the Tories don't fix that at their peril. That's Hugo Duncan. Sports, it's sport. Deputy Sports Editor Matt Gatwood's here with the latest sports news. Now, I think you got your prediction right.
I did. I said England would win.
Yeah.
I didn't realise it would be quite such a bleak game. It was not a great
Wasn't
one
it a good
to watch.
one?
No.
This is against South Africa.
We're talking rugby, aren't
France.
we?
Yeah.
We're talking rugby. We're talking Scotland. Scotland.
The Calcutta Cup. There we are.
Exactly.
Why is it called the Calcutta Cup when Calcutta's in India?
That's a very good question, which
you don't
I will
know the answer, do you?
for you
right,
tomorrow.
We'll get that tomorrow.
Once I've done a bit of research on that.
Okay.
But yes, they won. They won at the weekend. So it was, but it wasn't a great spectacle because of the weather conditions.
Wind,
exactly. exactly. Yeah. It was awful conditions. It was wet. The ball was slippery. It was the wind was astonishing. So one team going one way would kick the ball and it would come straight back at them, and the team at the other end with the wind were kicking it and would go far too far. So it wasn't a very pretty game, but it was a massively important win for England to finally, to get the Six Nations campaign up and running. So good effort under the circumstances.
And they did win in South Africa, so that meant it was all square.
So the cricketers won in South Africa, which meant the series finished all square, which meant they preserved this incredible run they've got of not losing a 50-over series now for 3 years. Obviously, which part of that was the World Cup.
How was it all square? So they both won one and drew one.
One was basically rained off, unfortunately.
I see.
And now they're not coming home. You might think they might be coming home now for this interminable tour. They're now playing 2020, a series of 2020 matches. So there'll be 3 2020s to come. But
in South Africa.
In South Africa,
right?
But it was another good performance. But the sadness is that 2 of the star players were the 2 spinners, Moeen Ali and Adil Rashid, and they're both making themselves unavailable for the Test match, for the Test series in Sri Lanka, which is upcoming. So it's quite interesting. Those 2 were our star performers.
But why?
Rashid says he's not ready for Test cricket, which really should be the selector's job to tell him whether he's ready. And Moeen was dropped last year and felt he needed a break from Test cricket, so he's still making himself unavailable, and meanwhile going to earn a few extra quid playing in a T20 tournament abroad.
And finally, and briefly, Sheffield United, they're nearly in the top 4.
Incredible story.
First season in the Premier League?
First season in the Premier League, came up last year. They got this real brilliant old school manager in Chris Wilder who...
I saw him on the telly. He looks like some bloke from down the pub.
He certainly does. And he just says it like it is.
Right.
He's a very sort of... None of this new fangled fancy ideas from him. That's probably doing them a disservice to suggest it's just, because they're a very good side. They're good to watch.
Yeah.
They're impressive. And they're up to 5th. They came back and won yesterday, beating Bournemouth, having been behind. So everyone keeps thinking, they'll drop down the league soon enough, but they're still there. So good on them.
All right, that's Deputy Sports Editor Matt Gatwood. Well, how do you get over a broken heart? It turns out that choosing the right foods can do the trick, as grief increases inflammation in the body, and foods such as roast chicken soup can help. So which food should you choose to help you get over a love disaster? Dietitian Jane Clark has some tips and recipes, not to mention 30 years of experience in the business. Jane, well, chicken soup, my next door neighbour is a great octogenarian Jewish grandmother, and she says chicken soup is the answer to all problems of the heart.
I think she's completely right, and I think we should look to an octogenarian to actually come up with the reality of how people find it. But yes, it can make a big difference to what you put inside your body and also how your body reacts to grief.
Yeah, what other things have you suggested people try, Jane? Stewed apples?
Yes, stewed apples. I think I'm known as a Bramley apple woman because stewed apples contain something called pectin, which makes the apple and the gut, which is very sensitive. We all know when we have heartache, we have grief, any shock, that the body actually feels really acidic and feels very raw and vulnerable inside. And stewed apples, that classic apple sauce, sips very easily, and also it's very easy to digest, because the last thing you want to do is put food inside your body, albeit it could be, what we call the really healthy foods, and they just go whizzing through your gut and make you feel 10 times worse. So it's really important you look at the types of foods, such as stewed apple. Risotto is another good one, because risotto is really easy to digest, especially if you just make it with a simple stock. Or it could be a simple pea soup that you've made with ingredients from the freezer, that just because it's warm, it's easy to digest, and something that just doesn't feel sort of very hard and unfriendly inside the gut.
Because there is no doubt when people really have, if they are mourning, maybe it's a broken relationship or actually somebody's died, that you really can have that terrible ache in your stomach and you can't seem to get rid of it.
Oh, yes. We have the old saying, you feel sick to the stomach with grief.
Yes.
And I've written in the paper that, it rocked me personally from losing a really good friend, but also from 30 years of looking after families, from grieving parents of young children right the way through to someone in their later years that they lose a friend or a companion. Grief does really hit the body hard. And the reason I've written the article is that we all hear about healthy eating, but actually in that moment of shock and trauma, your stomach is tiny. It's the size of your fist at the best of times.
Yeah, you
and
say
yes,
here your stomach was so knotted, even opening your mouth and contemplating chewing was too much for you.
Oh, it is. It's horrible. Yeah, I mean, you watch the movies, you just see that raw grief. But actually, this is the moment when, because of your fight and flight hormones, because it's that shock, you all know, and you get that gaunt look if you're not careful. Because what happens in the body is it becomes catabolic. So it's actually, we hear about anabolic steroids. We hear about athletes taking steroids to bring about what we call anabolism, which is muscle buildup. But what a grief and heartache and anything that's very shocking in the body causes is the opposite, and you become catabolic. So you start to break down your protein. So your protein comes from your muscle, and that's why you can quickly get that very pinned, pained,
Indeed.
exhausted feeling, because you break down your muscles. So going back to the chicken soup, chicken soup obviously is easy to digest, but it's also rich in protein.
Right.
And so I've written about the importance of protein when you're in that grief-stricken heartache state.
Absolutely. Jane, thanks for that. That's the dietitian, Jane Clark. So that's the answer. Chicken soup, particularly homemade, particularly if it's my next-door neighbours. So how much do you spend on your washing up liquid? Well, it turns out you might be selling yourself short with that bottle of fairy liquid, as there's a new wave of luxury washing up liquid costing, get this, up to £22 a bottle, and with all sorts of claims about what they'll do for your dishes. Joining me to discuss this trend is our very own Catherine Spenley, female writer. Catherine, have I got to upgrade my washing up liquid?
Well, absolutely, Andrew. I'm surprised you haven't already got some, £22 Tom Dixon. It's very stylish and needs to be by every sink.
Where would people buy that? I mean, where on earth would you find a bottle of washing up liquid for that much?
I confess I spotted it in Selfridges and thought, OK, this is an exciting thing, and then saw there were lots and lots of others in other shops. So Conran's shop, White Company, has their own brand. So £8 in the White Company for a wild mint washing up liquid, which apparently is going to make it sort of everyone's least favourite chore a bit of a treat.
And is the £22 bottle, is it a rather glamorous looking bottle?
It's so lovely. It's a silly amount of money to spend on some washing up liquid, but it is a beautiful thing. So it's a sort of lovely kind of greyish, smoky grey bottle. It's quite big, and it's got sort of rose gold letters on it, which makes it all quite pretty.
Yeah, and have you tried it?
I did not. I haven't tried it myself, but Louise Atkinson tried 5 different posh washing up liquids for us, and she loved them.
And did she think they were better than fairy washing up liquid? I mean, what would Nanette Newman make of this?
It's a very good question.
Hands that do dishes. We're showing our age here, of course.
Exactly. Hands that do dishes.
Yeah.
There's one that also goes in the dishwasher, and I think maybe for hands that do dishes, we need the Laundress, which is a sort of posh American brand that can sort of take your hands out of the equation.
I see. I've got to confess. So I have my dishwasher, but I do have washing up liquid because so I get it in Waitrose, and I did experiment with those eco ones.
Yeah.
But in the end, to hell with it.
Yeah.
Fairy washing up liquid.
Fairies. I have to say, obviously, Andrew, yours is Waitrose and not Aldi, so we're already on the slightly posh side. But I agree. I'm a fairy girl myself. I like just old-fashioned stuff.
And just remind me, what were the verdict of the 5 posh ones? Which was the best one?
So Tom Dixon came out very well, and similarly,
that is the £22
That is the £22 one. Similarly, the Laundress did very well, and I think that's sort of slightly softer with some soft ingredients in it too. So.
You know what? I'm going to have to go and try it.
Exactly, this is it. We have to try.
That's Catherine Spenley, female writer. Well, that's all we have time for today. For the latest from the Daily Mail Newsroom, come back every day for briefings at 7 a.m, 12 noon, and of course 5 p.m, where you can listen to me all over again. That's all from me, Andrew Pearce from The Daily Show. I'll be back tomorrow. Have yourselves a great evening and good night.